Now, we're over a year away from the 2024 presidential election, and we're already starting to see glaring warning signs for the Republican Party that things are likely not going to go their way. So we're going to take a look at the Trump versus Biden matchup, which as of this point in time is the most likely matchup so far, and analyze why in this scenario, Donald Trump is definitely the underdog and Joe Biden is very much the favorite. So we're going to take a look at some of the early polling, RCP, some of the key battleground states, as well as take a look at the 2020 election results and where Donald Trump needs to improve in order to actually beat Joe Biden. Because as of right now, despite the fact that Joe Biden is underwater by 12 points, he is the clear favorite to win re-election in 2024. And when you look at the numbers, the metrics, the economy, that really shouldn't be the case. But Republicans have made it so hard for themselves to actually beat the Democrats in this regard. So we're going to take a look at all of those things in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So if we take a look at RCP, this was an aggregate that for the longest time, Donald Trump was actually leading Joe Biden in. But of course now, in the past few days, Joe Biden has actually overtaken Donald Trump. He's up in RCP by 0.4%. Now, RCP in the general election polling, this is all across the nation, so this is the generic ballot. So on its own, it really doesn't mean much because obviously in America, we don't choose the president by popular vote. However, Donald Trump was leading in this regard for a while. Now he's not. It's likely to turn away from his direction as time goes on. And it's easy to see why. Donald Trump's facing multiple criminal indictments. He's been becoming more unhinged against other Republicans running against him. And I think the general public overall, while they don't like Joe Biden, they don't like Donald Trump even more. And they see him more as a chaotic force when America's looking for a more stabilizing force, a return to normalcy. And that's why even if Joe Biden is very unpopular against Donald Trump, I think Americans will almost certainly choose Biden over Trump. And we're going to get into that as we go on throughout this video. Now, if we take a look at the electoral map, there are 6 key states making up 78 electoral votes. These are the states I've chosen as the states that will determine the election. These were some of the closest states in the 2020 election. Biden won Nevada by just 2.5 points, give or take. Arizona by 0.3, Wisconsin by 0.6, Pennsylvania by 1.2, North Carolina, Trump won by 1.3, and then of course Georgia was the closest state in the 2020 election. Donald Trump only lost that state by 0.2. So these states are incredibly close. All of them have a margin of less than 1.5 percentage points, which makes them really competitive in 2024 right off the bat. Now, if you want to expand the map slightly, you could include Michigan, although Michigan was a state that Joe Biden won by nearly 3 percentage points. And since then, it's only taken more of a leftward lurch. You've seen the Republicans basically kicked out of power in the state Senate, House of Representatives there. They held on to, I believe, the state Senate in Michigan since the 1970s. But once you had the overturning of Roe and, of course, the 2020 midterms, that was totally upended. So Republicans nationally are in their weakest position in over a decade in terms of state legislative control, in terms of governorships. They're in an incredibly weak position going into the 2024 election. In Pennsylvania, for instance, Republicans lost the state house there. They hold on to the state Senate. In North Carolina, this is one of the only states on this map where Republicans are doing well. You could argue Georgia as well. Every Republican not named Donald Trump is doing fairly well there. If you look at the 2022 results, Republicans there were reelected by pretty large margins, high single digits for the most part. Even the Trumpian statewide candidates did fairly well. The only candidate who did poorly was, of course, Herschel Walker, who was Trump's pick for Senate. And, he had his own personal issues as well. He was a really awful candidate, not very bright guy. So you had those factors as well sort of impact the race there. But Republicans, besides Donald Trump, have been holding on in the state of Georgia, even though demographically the state is slipping away very rapidly. Arizona, Republicans still narrowly hold on to the state house and state Senate. Of course, you've got a Democratic governor now there, Katie Hobbs. And of course, in Nevada, you've got a Republican governor, but you have a fully democratically controlled legislature. And I forgot to mention Wisconsin, but you have a Republican House and Senate there, Democratic governor. So Republicans do control some power in these states, but all of these states, barring Nevada and Georgia, have Democratic governors. And that was, of course, the case in 2018 as well, except the fact that Nevada had a Democratic governor and Arizona had a Republican governor after 2018. But looking at these key states, they're going to decide the election. Now, if we take a look again at the 2020 results, we'll start off with the state of Nevada. The math gets very tricky for Donald Trump, especially in these suburban states. Now, Nevada is one of the only states on this list where trends are actually somewhat going in the Republicans' direction. You take a look at Clark County. Donald Trump only lost Clark County by around 9 points. That's a pretty good performance, especially given the fact that in 2016, he lost Clark County by 11 points. And Democrats before that have won the county by even larger margins. Of course, 2012, 2008, Barack Obama winning Clark County by pretty safe margins. Nevada is one of the only states that has continually been trending in Republicans' direction. Even in the midterms where Republicans did disastrous overall, Adam Laxalt, while he did lose, only lost to Catherine Cortez Masto by around 0.8%. So that's still a better margin than in 2016 where you had Catherine Cortez Masto win by, I believe, 2 points. So, Nevada has been trending more in the Republicans' direction. I think you could chalk that up to Republicans doing a little bit better with Latinos. You could also chalk it up to a lot of California Republicans moving into the Las Vegas metro area, kind of keeping it stagnant politically, if not trending in Republicans' direction. So out of all the states on this list, Nevada is the one trending in Republicans' direction. North Carolina, even though Republicans have continually held on to the state, their margins have been getting slimmer and slimmer. So this is a state Republicans certainly need to look out for. But all the other states on this list have either been stagnant politically or have been trending back in favor of the Democrats. Arizona has been moving heavily in Democrats' direction. We saw that in 2016 when Donald Trump only won the state by 3.5 points. Romney won Arizona by 9 points just 4 years earlier. And then fast forward to 2020, Donald Trump becomes the first Republican to lose Arizona since Bob Dole in 1996. And he loses very narrowly, but the fact that Democrats are winning Arizona is really indicative of how poor Republicans' position actually is in the Sunbelt states and really in the suburbs, because Maricopa County makes up around 2/3 of Arizona's population. If Trump had won Maricopa County, he would have won the state. And I think you also have a similar dynamic in Nevada where most of the population lives in one metro. Republicans just need to do well enough there or well enough outstate to actually circumvent Democrats' gains there. Now, Arizona is probably the most anti-Trump sort of state on this list. The Rust Belt states were won by Trump in 2016, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the first time Republicans had won those states since 84 and 88. So, Donald Trump does have that sort of up his sleeve, I guess, that he does do better in these Midwestern areas that are less socially conservative, more economically liberal, which is sort of the kind of campaign that Trump's been running. Even though he is down the line pretty much a Republican on most of the issues, he does have a Democratic background, and I think that does help him in these states where you have a lot of ancestral Democrats that have now been warming up to the GOP. But there's other demographic factors as well in these states that sort of cancel out the Republican gains in more of the rural areas. In Wisconsin, you've seen Democrats doing a lot better in the WOW counties, the suburban counties outside of Milwaukee. Donald Trump in particular does really bad in these counties. Ozaukee County, for instance, he only won by around 12 points. This is a county that I believe Ron Johnson back in 2016 won by nearly 30 points. So you're seeing a massive falling away of GOP support in these counties, and a lot of it is due to Donald Trump, because these counties by and large are still, white working class counties. So this is a demographic that Donald Trump should be doing fairly well in. And, demographics are changing slightly in these counties. They are getting more educated. Educated voters are fleeing the GOP, mostly because of Trump. But these are still Republican counties, and Donald Trump lost the state of Wisconsin because he failed to win the margins he needed to in these counties in particular, in places like Green Bay, these white working class areas. That really was his strength in 2016, proved to be his weakness, because 2016 was really the balance for Donald Trump. He had just enough white working class support and just enough suburban support to put him over the top in a lot of these battleground states. In 2024, I don't think that's going to be the case. If you look at the 2022 midterms, we take a look at the results of some of these Rust Belt states. Wisconsin, for example, you did have Ron Johnson win very narrowly, but the Trump-endorsed candidate for governor, Tim Michels, did pretty abysmally. And that's because he failed to get enough white working class support and enough suburban support. He did even worse in Ozaukee County than Donald Trump even did. He did slightly better in Waukesha and Washington, But the point remains the same, that a lot of these candidates since Donald Trump's win in 2016 have not been able to strike the right balance. And Donald Trump himself has certainly not been able to strike the right balance, as seen in the 2020 election. Now, a lot of people have mistakenly compared 2016 to 2024, but the political environment since 2016 is vastly different. We've had Donald Trump in the political sphere for around 8 years now. In 2016, Donald Trump was still a relatively new commodity. Most people didn't have their minds made up about him, and that's ultimately why he was able to beat Hillary Clinton in 2016, because Donald Trump was just a little less unpopular than Hillary Clinton. At this point in time, Donald Trump is more unpopular than Joe Biden. Not only that, he's already been president. Americans have seen what he's like as president, and the majority of Americans, quite frankly, didn't like it. That's why he lost in 2020, and that's why I think he's going to lose again in 2024, because the math really isn't there for him. When you look at the key battleground states, even this early on, you've got Joe Biden, who again is underwater by 12 points in approval, beating Donald Trump quite convincingly in some of these Rust Belt states where Donald Trump was supposed to do very well. You have Wisconsin here, which has always had a Democratic bias in the polling, but you have Joe Biden beating in some cases by high single digits, double digits against Donald Trump. You go to Pennsylvania, another key battleground state, and these are states that Republicans had pretty poor performances in. You know, Wisconsin, Republicans lost the governorship. In Pennsylvania, they lost the governorship and the Senate and the state house. So Pennsylvania's been a disaster for the GOP. That's mostly their own doing. It's because they've nominated candidates that have been well outside the mainstream, that independent voters have rejected by and large. And Donald Trump is that type of person. Even though he won the state in 2016, the dynamic is very different. You've got a number of younger voters, a number of minority voters who weren't registered to vote in 2016, now do vote. The demographics are changing. Suburbs are getting bluer. You know, the area around Philadelphia, for instance, Montgomery County, you know, Donald Trump losing Montgomery County by like 25 points. You go back to 2016, Donald Trump only lost Montgomery County by around 21 points. So you have big shifts in these suburban counties. He loses Chester County by 9 points in 2016. In 2020, he's losing it by 17. So you have a massive shift in the suburban counties away from Donald Trump, and the rural areas can't counter it. This is the case in Pennsylvania. It's the case in Wisconsin. It's the case in Arizona. It's the case in Nevada. It's the case in Georgia. And it's probably going to be the case in North Carolina as well. Again, North Carolina is a state that's been trending very leftward because of Raleigh, the Charlotte area, and has only really stayed Republican because these black belt counties and some of the counties in the Southeast have trended in the Republican direction. But these counties can only trend so far right so quickly. And there really aren't the numbers that Republicans need to have in North Carolina to hold on to the state for very much longer. They need to do better in Mecklenburg County. They need to do better in Raleigh. And I don't think Donald Trump is going to do better. Again, if you look at the 2022 midterms, Ted Budd won North Carolina, but he only won North Carolina because of a turnout differential. In North Carolina, Republicans actually did turn out. Democrats did have slightly depressed turnout. But when you actually take the margins in these counties and you put 2020 turnout on them, Ted Budd actually loses extremely narrowly to Sherry Beasley. So North Carolina is very much a state that Democrats could win in 2024, and especially if Donald Trump is the nominee again. He's more unpopular than Joe Biden. He's losing in the generic ballot now. It's a year out. It's likely only to get worse for him because the economy, while it's not doing great, it's doing well enough for voters to overlook a lot of Trump's flaws. And again, it would take a massive catastrophe in the nation. You'd have to have a left-wing third-party candidate. You would need the stars to align for Donald Trump to win 2024 again. And just taking a look at the numbers aren't there for him. You know, Georgia, which was one of the closest states in the 2020 election, it's really only been a disappointing state for Republicans since then. You did have a bright spot in 2022, but that's because Brian Kemp was carrying the ticket, and he did fairly well there. If we just take a look at Georgia, for example, Herschel Walker was the only statewide Republican to lose in Georgia. Every other statewide Republican won fairly convincingly. That's because Georgia, again, the Atlanta suburbs, is a state where Republicans can still win. Generic Republicans can still win, but these sort of MAGA candidates, these Trump-endorsed candidates, are just losing. That's just the fact of the matter. You can have a lot of Trump's policies in these Republicans and still win, but this MAGA brand of stop the steal, Donald Trump is the only person that can save the country, it's very toxic for Republicans. And, you know, quite frankly, it's going to lose them the 2024 election at this rate. That's why I really believe that any other Republican would actually stand a pretty good chance against Joe Biden. I don't think Donald Trump can beat Joe Biden in 2024. This isn't the 2016 election. And I can go into a lot more detail in other videos about these individual states in particular. But overall, in all these battleground states, minus Nevada, the trends are going away from Donald Trump. So, if Joe Biden wins Pennsylvania, he wins Wisconsin, that's the election. He just needs to hold on to Wisconsin and Pennsylvania to win. If Donald Trump wins Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and let's say he wins North Carolina too, he still loses the election. So it really only takes Wisconsin and Pennsylvania to hand Joe Biden a second term. Now, if Donald Trump somehow miraculously wins Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, but still loses Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada, that's the election also. Biden still wins. So the math is on Biden's side. Biden has the advantage. He is the incumbent. And you have to expect that these polls are probably going to swing in his direction. If Biden is leading now with a negative 12 approval rating, it's probably only going to get worse if his approval does somewhat get better from now until the general election. So Republicans really need to think long and hard about their choice in the Republican primary, because as of right now, Republicans are setting themselves up for failure. This is a train wreck in slow motion, and I think this is going to have massive down ballot impact. When you look at Senate races, when you look at the House, I think the House is almost gone for Republicans in 2024 when you really look at it. If Donald Trump has any worse a performance in these states than he did in 2020 and 2024, Republicans are in for a real tough time, because the maps are actually worse for Republicans than they were during the 2020 election. And there's a lot of key races that were decided by just 1 or 2 points in 2020 that I think Democrats are going to win quite convincingly with their incumbents in 24 at this rate. So in summary, this is a rough time to be a Republican, because as of right now, you have a nominee that's very unpopular with the American public, but he's very popular with the Republican base. And there's a massive disconnect between the Republican base and the American people. The American people are not fond of Joe Biden, but they're especially not fond of Donald Trump. And I think ultimately, as of right now, that's what's going to do the Republicans in 2024. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, comment down below your thoughts. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.